with our masks on, so I'm going to try and project as loudly as I can so that you can hear me. But I'm really excited that you're here. My name is Alyssa Robinson, and I'm here with our senior pastor, Reverend Daniel Humbert. And this is Go Beyond. And so what Go Beyond is a chance for you to dig deeper into the message that we discussed on Sunday. So right now, as a congregation, we are in the book of Acts. And today we are focusing on Acts chapters 8 and 9. And so we're going to be looking a little bit into the history. I know that Daniel's been doing his homework based on the questions I gave him. So I hope that you'll enjoy this time with us. So I want to go ahead and jump into our first question. The beginning of chapter 8, the very first verse even, marks the beginning of the persecution of the new church. And so what I want to better understand is, why did that persecution start and who was targeted during that time? Because I know it talks about the apostles were in Jerusalem, but many of their followers were outside of Jerusalem. So who exactly is being persecuted and why?
Yeah, so this is, as you say, the beginning of persecution. It is led by Paul, or who is then known as Saul. And so Stephen, the apostle who's been selected alongside of Philip and the other 5, have started their ministry, and Stephen has been killed. That's what chapter 7 is all about. And it says at the end of chapter 7, Saul was literally standing over him, and Saul began at this point, chapter 8 verse 1 says, to lead that persecution. So the persecution is not only in Jerusalem, but it's in the surrounding areas. A part of what the beginning of chapter 8 also says is that the apostles kind of hang out in Jerusalem, and the other converts and the other believers have begun to disperse. Quite literally, scholars believe it's sort of the fulfillment of Acts chapter 1, verse 8, where it says, "You will become my witnesses in all Jerusalem, in Judea, in Samaria, until the ends of the earth." And so a part of what we begin to see is that the persecution actually sort of heightens that opportunity. So that was the goal, but the persecution begins to sort of push them further out. And so now we're told in chapter 8 that they're going out into Samaria, which is kind of a bit of an unknown region, and Judea, which is a very known region, and they're beginning to share the gospel. That's probably causing consternation, right? That's probably causing people like Saul and others to go, hey, wait, we don't want you to do this. We don't believe in this. We don't want you doing this. And so the persecution begins. The apostles, we believe, probably stayed in Jerusalem as a way to say, hey, we're going to keep the fort. We're going to kind of maintain strength here and stability here, but we want to encourage you to go out. So the early followers get persecuted primarily because they're literally sharing the gospel, and Saul and others don't want that to happen.
So in this scripture this week, we're introduced to the character Simon. And he is introduced to us as a sorcerer. He's someone who's practicing sorcery, and in this story it kind of unveils that he heard Philip talking about Jesus, talking about the Gospels, and it made the comment that even a sorcerer decided to follow Philip and ended up following Philip everywhere. What does it mean that Simon was a sorcerer at that time? Because when I think of that, I think of Harry Potter.
Yeah.
What category would he have been? What kind of person would he be today if they were calling him a sorcerer at that time?
Yeah, well, so sorcery is sort of what I call an old-fashioned word for magic. And so he's a magician. And so David Copperfield, right? Or a guy, I've just forgotten the other guy, the more modern guy's name, but he's doing magic. And magic is considered evil at the time. Whereas today we would say magic is entertainment. We would say magic is exciting and enthralling. And so we wouldn't have a negative connotation for what he's doing. But in the day, when you don't understand the distinction between miracles and magic, it creates a problem. And so that's why, as it tells us in chapter 8, Simon actually comes to believe. He comes to cherish the faith of Christ, and he becomes a follower. And he's enamored with the fact that Philip and John and Peter can do these miracles and can raise people, heal people, so forth and so on. And so in his faith, he's kind of like, well, this is really cool, and that's somewhat like what I was doing. And so I'm kind of wondering, golly, could I kind of slip you some, bills or something to get this thing that you're doing? Because it seems to be even better than my magic. And of course, the dilemma there is you can't buy faith, and you can't buy the opportunity to heal or to cause miracles. And so Simon is looked down upon, and I'd forgotten this as I was looking back at notes and stuff, that there's actually a term for this called simony in the church, and it's about trying to buy off, church personnel, or to get your way in the life of the church. And so Simon gets a really bad rap because he really wants to be faithful. He actually wants to do the right thing, but in his naivete and in his sort of newness to the faith, he just kind of assumes he can buy this, and he doesn't see that there's a problem with it.
Well, and I felt so bad for him when I read that, because it seems to me that he was just working with the culture of the time. I'm assuming that culturally, if you wanted something, if you offered up a little extra cash, you would get it.
Right.
And so that's what he was thinking, as far as like, I want to know more about this faith. Maybe if I give them money, they'll, let me in on it. And then I felt like he was berated for that, and just made to feel horrible when it felt like it was coming from such a good place. He was just kind of getting it wrong.
Well, obviously people can interpret his heart differently. Some would clearly interpret it as he really is just a novice at this, and he's really just trying to do the right thing. Others would say that's just kind of the culture he came out of, is you just buy your way into things. And so wherever you are, it does come off kind of harsh, but it's not unlike what happens in chapter 5 where Ananias and Sapphira die, right? Mm-hmm. This is just, hey, this is how we do it. You need to be really clear, and we're going to make it clear. Don't do that, guy.
Yeah. Well, they made it clear. So my last question for today, setting the history and the context and better understanding for these chapters, is we are specifically told about the story of the Ethiopian eunuch. Mm. And how Philip was moved to speak to this man because he saw him reading from Isaiah. Mm-hmm. And so my big question is, there are probably so many people that the Spirit moved Philip to speak with throughout this time. I mean, it just seems constant. Why is this story significant, and why is it specifically pulled out and put in Scripture for us to read?
Well, I can only tell you my conjectures on all that, and I own that I have a bit of a bias in all that, but so my bias is this. I believe the book of Acts, as we've pointed out several times, of course, tells us the early church and why it's important that they did what they did. And a part of what we learn, certainly later in the book of Acts, is how diverse the church becomes. The church becomes diverse because it was ready and able and willing to reach a diverse audience. And so I think the eunuch is a perfect example of that. The eunuch, being from Ethiopia, is from another continent, from another country, from another culture, a different ethnicity, obviously, and race. And so I believe that the writer of the book of Acts is trying to highlight the fact that this is a very abundantly clear way to say, the gospel is for everybody. We need to share the gospel with anybody and everybody, most specifically perhaps even with people with whom we are very different, and that we ought to proactively pursue these relationships. And that's what he did, right? I mean, there is literally nothing that these two guys hold in common other than their gender. They're different in every way imaginable. And so for Philip to go there is, number one, not our natural inclination, right? Even today we understand, and unfortunately highly highlighted in these issues of the day, we don't naturally go to people who are different from us ethnically or racially or whatever. So for Philip to go, we kind of have to own that it's a nudging of the Spirit, that it's a sort of pushing of the Spirit, that it's not something he would do naturally. But I think it's a great way to highlight that, man, we are called to share this good news with people who are different from us. And what better way than to just go develop a relationship, start up a conversation, and talk about what the guy's interested in. He's obviously interested in this passage of Scripture. So Philip starts this conversation.
All right, well, that's about all the time that we have today. And again, I am sorry for the connectivity issues, us coming on a little bit late. But hopefully you got some of your questions answered. And remember, if you have more questions about what we talk about on Sunday, what we talk about in Go Beyond, go to tmumc.org/go beyond. On that page, you'll see all previous episodes. And there's a section at the bottom of the page for you to submit your own questions if you have them. So I hope that you'll use that, and we will see you again at Wednesday at 12:30.
Have a great week, y'all. Thanks for joining us.